The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented.
Some writers would have us believe that there isn't any nutrition without meat. Others write that to go vegetarian means your menus will be as bland as cardboard. You don't want to miss the facts about nutrition and vegetarians in this segment of Wonderfully Made. With us again is Dr. Clarence Ng, one of the physicians for Weimar's New Start Lifestyle Center. I'm your host, Marcel Wiggers. Well, now, Dr. Ng, can a family, a meat and potatoes family, really find happiness without meat?
Absolutely. You know, the unique thing is that as most people eat their foods, they eat the same types of foods like on a regular cycle. In fact, you know, every 2 or 3 weeks they're going to be eating some of the same dishes. So we can help to expand their culinary horizons, introduce them to new foods which taste good and are good for them. And it's really exciting to have watched people make these changes when they realize that there are other things besides meat and potatoes that taste good and provide good nutrition for them.
Now, when we talk about nutrition, some people talk about vitamins and carbohydrates and fats. What are all the things our body needs for good nutrition?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. Carbohydrates are really the basic part of our food that we eat, because carbohydrates should make up the bulk of our calories. As we look at proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, carbohydrates should make up about 60 to 70% of the calories that we take in. Carbohydrates are basically our cereal grains, there are fruits, and there are vegetables. And as we look at our cereal grains, we think of wheat, oats, barley, rye, millet, triticale. These are primary sources of carbohydrates, along with our root vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, things like this, and our fruit. As we think about carbohydrates, we also think about sugar. You know, sugar makes food taste good, but sugar is a refined carbohydrate. We talk about the refined carbohydrates like sugar, and we talk about the complex or unrefined carbohydrates like our whole grain cereals. Whole wheat as compared to, you know, the white flour, white bread. These are some of the things that we look at. When we go and look at sugars, sometimes I ask people when I'm teaching a class, do you know how much sugar cane it takes to make a teaspoon of sugar? And you know, many times they don't know, but it takes 3 feet of sugar cane, 1 yard of sugar cane, to make 1 teaspoon of sugar. And when we look at sugar, you can have a candy bar, maybe 7 or 8 teaspoons of sugar. When you compare that with sugar cane, for those of you who have ever had the opportunity to eat sugar cane, you know, I don't think if you've ever eaten sugar cane, you probably ever ate more than a piece maybe about 5 or 6 inches long. Why? Well, because, you know, you chew on it. For those of you who know what sugar cane is like, you can chew on it and you can eat it, but I'm sure that you didn't swallow the whole thing. What do you have left? It's something we call fiber. And what did they do with most of the fiber? They, you know, discarded it. Because you can't eat, well, you're not going to eat the fiber. The way that God has designed the plants and the sugar cane, you can eat all the sugar cane you want, and you're not going to get too much sugar. But if you take a candy bar or soda pop, that has the same amount of sugar as 21 feet of sugar cane. There's no way you're going to eat that much sugar cane.
So it sounds like when we talk about carbohydrates, there are really 2 different kinds of carbohydrates. There are the complex carbohydrates and the sugars. So when you're talking about getting most of your energy from carbohydrates, what are you talking about?
Well, I think this should make up the bulk of your calories, the majority of your calories. So I encourage people to eat primarily carbohydrates, but again, the whole plant foods, the unrefined form. And that brings us again to what we're talking about, flour, whole wheat flour versus white flour. There's an interesting demonstration which I think we can show our viewers about comparing the nutrition found in white bread versus whole wheat bread. So why don't we go ahead with that?
All right. Now, in one slice, we'll compare white bread to one slice of whole wheat bread. Now, in order to get the same amount of calcium, you would need 2 slices of white bread. In order to get the same amount of potassium, or fiber, or protein, you would need 4 slices of white bread. Now, if you want to get the same amount of vitamin B1, or vitamin B6, niacin, or iron, you would have to eat 7 slices of white bread in order to get the same amount of these vitamins than 1 slice or whole wheat bread. Now, folic acid, you would need about the same as well. We know that folic acid is very important in terms of our brain and our spinal cord. In fact, pregnant women often are prescribed folic acid because it decreases what they call neural tube defects, a brain disorder that can happen in babies. You'd have to eat 6 or 7 slices of white bread to get the same as 1 slice of whole wheat bread. Now, biotin, you need to have 10 slices. Vitamin E, you need 20 slices of white bread to get the same amount of vitamin E. And some studies suggest that vitamin E will actually decrease your risk for coronary artery disease. But you'd have to eat 20 slices of white bread, a whole loaf of white bread, to get the same amount of vitamin E as would be in 1 slice of whole wheat bread. Phytochemicals, something we've discovered not too long ago. It's in foods. You would have to eat 99 slices of white bread in order to get the same amount of phytochemicals as there is in 1 slice of whole wheat bread. Can you imagine? By the way, there are only 40 slices of white bread right here. You'd have to eat 99 slices of white bread to get the same amount of phytochemicals as in 1 slice of whole wheat bread. Some people call it the great grain robbery.
Absolutely true. In fact, if you also think of calories, we find that if you have 1 slice of bread having 50 calories, then when we do that, you're going to have 100 slices of bread times 50. That's going to be far too many calories that we don't need.
So when we get unrefined foods, or when we get refined foods, we end up getting, again, too many calories without the nutrition. They've done some interesting studies in terms of endurance with carbohydrates. Is that good for you, carbohydrates, in terms of being able to go the distance?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the studies that I think you may be referring to is one that was done in which they had the same group of athletes on 3 different diets. The first diet was one which is high in fat, high in protein, what the average person would think would be a good healthy diet. They got on an exercise bicycle and they went as long as they could against a measured load, and they were able to go for about 57 minutes. Now on a diet which is lower in fat and lower in protein but still had more than they need, it was a mixed diet, they were able to go on a bicycle for 114 minutes. This is twice
same
as long.
athletes, same training, same muscles.
Right.
The only thing that changed was the fuel.
Right. And then the third diet, same group again, they went on a high carbohydrate diet similar to what athletes do when we're training for a marathon or a long race, a long bicycle ride. They do what we call carbohydrate loading. And then they had this athletes, they get on the exercise bicycle and they rode the bicycle for 167 minutes. Almost 3 times as long as the 57 minutes of their first diet that they were on. They also took a small needle and they took a little piece of muscle to measure the amount of glycogen in the muscle.
What's glycogen?
Glycogen is the way that carbohydrate, glucose, is stored in our body, and that's the source of energy. We call this our energy. It's stored in the liver as well as the muscles. Well, they measured it in the first diet on the people that were on the first diet. The amount of glycogen stored was 0.63 grams per 100 grams of wet muscle tissue. On the athletes who were on the high carbohydrate diet, they had 3.51 grams, almost 6 times as much glycogen stored in the muscle. And this is why it's very, very important. And really, carbohydrates are our primary source of energy in all the things that we do.
In fact, they have done follow-up studies where they checked how much glycogen was inside the muscle. And they found that if somebody exercised, the glycogen content actually fell in the muscle. And if they still ate a low carbohydrate diet, not replacing these carbohydrates, then the next day they wouldn't have as much energy. The next day after that it would drop even more, and by the third day or so it was very difficult for them to exercise. So it's very important in terms of endurance and for repeated exercise to reload your muscles every day.
Well, this was even brought more forcefully to my mind when I became involved in running marathons. So the first time I ran a marathon, I said, well, you know, the most important thing is hydration. Drink lots of water. So all I would drink was water, and we would run the race. And by the time I got through 3/4 of the race, you know, I was out of energy. So then I started to read and study a little bit more, and they said, you know, doing something as long as a marathon, especially the time it takes me, which is longer than a real good marathon, right? It takes me like 5 hours. You've got to take in some form of glycogen. So then I would start to take the supplement they had, and when I found out that when I did this, my glycogen in my muscles wasn't depleted as rapidly, there was some in my blood to replace that, I was able to do much better. My time was less. That's why it's really important for you to have an energy source when you compete in a long endurance event like a 10-kilometer or a marathon or a 100-mile bicycle ride, because your body needs that energy.
Well, I know that I've heard of carbohydrate loading for people that do endurance runs. But what about strength? Don't I need a lot of protein in order to remain strong?
You do need protein to remain strong, and you need the proper amount. But interestingly enough, as we look at the standard American diet, by the way, do you know what the acronym for Standard American Diet is? It's SAD, S, Standard, A, American Diet. High in fat, high in protein, and high in refined carbohydrates. Getting back to the topic of protein, we need a certain amount of protein, but the average American already gets more protein than they need. The average American is probably taking about 100 or more grams of protein per day. And you can easily get by with 50 to 60 grams of protein a day. So we don't need as much protein. As we look back at the original studies, when they were trying to decide how much protein the average person needed, they thought that a person needed approximately 4 ounces or 120 grams of protein per day. But as they've continued the studies of nutrition, we found out that you could get by with as little an amount as 20 grams of protein per day, providing you get the right amino acids. So when we look at our requirement suggested amount of between 40 and 60 grams of protein, you see this includes a very nice and adequate safety margin for the average person.
Well, all right, I'll buy that, but I also know that, you know, protein is often used to lose weight, and isn't that what we want because we're all too big anyway?
If we're overweight, we definitely need to lose weight, but losing weight with a high-protein diet is really not the way to go. You're right, it's very popular. It's been advocated by many people who have written different types of books with different types of weight loss programs. And the interesting thing, or maybe we say the interesting and unfortunate thing, is it does work, but the thing is, if they continue with that type of program, it's really not good for their body, because most of the time the protein they're eating is animal protein, which contains too much fat, which is going to be something we're going to be talking about at another time. And the increased fat increases their risk for raising their cholesterol, heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and all of these other things as well. So that's really not the way to go. And you can't continue on a high-protein diet without causing problems. Now, what are some of the problems that they cause? We find that the average person on a high-protein diet, as we look at the age at which the American girl has started menstruating, we call that the term menarche. We find that from 1900, as we're coming up as the through the years, through the last part of the 20th century, the age of menarche is slowly going down. And that's because of the increased amounts of protein and fat in the American diet. This is one of the problems. And with that comes also the sooner a female starts to menstruate, the higher her risk is for developing breast cancer at a later age. Another problem associated with excess protein in the diet is osteoporosis.
How does that work?
Well, it seems like the increased protein which the average person takes tends to draw out or leach out the calcium that is deposited in our bones. And this especially happens after the age of menopause in ladies, somewhere around the age of 45, 50, and so on. And it happens more slowly in men also. If your protein content of the diet is high, we find that the bones gradually weaken, and it's because the protein binds with the calcium and it takes it out.
All right, so it's been shown that we don't need 120 milligrams of protein a day, that we can actually probably get away with, somewhere around 20, 25 grams a day. But what about the different amino acids? Isn't meat a complete protein, and I'd have to worry about getting complete proteins if I'm a vegetarian?
You're right. Meat is a complete protein, and you're right that we need amino acids. In fact, they divide amino acids into two classes. One group they call the non-essential, and the other group they call the essential. The essential amino acids must be amino acids which you find in the food that you eat. The non-essential amino acids will be made by your body. So when we look at foods, it's true that meat is a complete protein, but when you combine from the plant sources a legume with a grain, you get a complete protein. They have the amino acids in the right proportions and the right amounts to give you a complete protein. But there is one legume which is a complete protein all by itself. And that's one that is used very commonly, not only here in America, but throughout Asia as well. And that legume is a soybean. That's an excellent source of protein. It's a complete protein, contains all the amino acids we need in the right proportion and right amounts for growth and for good health.
All right. So I'll probably get all the protein I need, but what about the calcium? Would I get enough calcium if I don't drink milk?
Calcium is found in dark, leafy green vegetables, and that's an abundant source of calcium. Another interesting fact is that if we have less calcium in our diet, then our body absorbs more. People think that, like you said, you have to drink milk for calcium. But there was an interesting advertising campaign which was thought about, which never appeared some time back. And that is the milk producers had gotten together a group of very attractive models, and they measured their bone density, and then they were to drink several glasses of milk every day. And at the end of the study, they were to measure their bone density again and to see, they were going to demonstrate that their bones were more dense because they had had the milk every day. But interestingly enough, that advertising campaign never appeared, because when they re-x-rayed and checked for their bone density, their bones were not more dense because they had drunk the milk. So, as we said, dark leafy greens, whole grain cereals, and legumes are an excellent source of dietary calcium, and milk is really not the best source.
Why is it that some of the people that have the highest calcium intake actually have the most hip fractures?
Well, that goes back to the aspect of when we take in if we're using milk and more protein, because oftentimes the people who are taking these calcium supplements are taking excessive protein. Again, the protein is tending to leach out the calcium, and many of the calcium supplements, not enough of that is absorbed to do them the good that they really need to do. So calcium supplements are important, but still food is the best source. And if you are going to use calcium supplement, probably one of the better sources is calcium citrate. You don't want to take calcium carbonate. So if you must take, or really think it's necessary, calcium citrate is the form to use your calcium in.
What about fats? How important are those in our life?
Fats are very important because You know, the right amount of fat in your diet is important and necessary. We need what we call essential fatty acids, and if we don't have those, we're not going to have good health. And the right amount of fat for an individual, well, you know, it's necessary. If a woman has the right amount of fat in the right places, she looks very nice. If she has the wrong amount of fat, too much in the wrong places, she doesn't look so nice, and likewise for a man. You know, fat is important. It serves as insulation. It serves as padding, and it helps to protect the body. So we do need a certain amount of fat, but we don't want to have too much.
How can we ensure we get the right fat, and how much do we need?
Well, as we think of the caloric content of our diet, somewhere between 20 and 30% of our calories should be as fat. And again, one of the good sources for fat in our diet are foods like avocados, foods like olives, whole grain cereals, nuts, and seeds. These are an excellent source of natural fat, and these are readily available to us.
You know, I'd like to think of our body like a car. You know, when you get a brand new car, you don't need a whole lot of spare parts, and protein is really the spare parts. It helps us build new muscles. It's used for hormones and a few other things, but we don't need all that much. You know, we also don't need all that much fat. You know, imagine driving a car without oil, you'd be in deep trouble. But what you mostly need is fuel. And the fuel for our body are the carbohydrates. And so the majority of our food should really be carbohydrates, fuel to keep going. And when should you tank up your car? Before you go on a trip or after your trip? And how does that relate to our diet plan?
Well, as we're looking at our diet plan, you're going to fill up your car, I hope, before you go on a trip. And likewise, when we start our journey through the day, the best time and the best meal and probably the most important meal of the day is your breakfast. Again, we go back to our principle, breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince. And if you're going to have an evening meal at all, it should be the lightest and smallest meal of the day. So you need your calories at the beginning of the day. We don't need them at the end of the day. If we take them in at the end of the day, it's going to cause us more problems with weight control and weight management. It's going to be a lot easier to gain weight if we eat our largest meal at the end of the day.
Yeah, I understand that 60% of Americans eat 60% of their calories after 6 p.m. Now, you know, most of our bodies is water. You know, if you weigh 150 pounds, fully 100 pounds is water. How much water should you be taking in?
Well, as we look at the average person should be drinking between 6 and 8 glasses of water a day. The rule that I kind of use for people, I say 1 glass of water for approximately each 15 pounds of body weight. This will make sure that they get in enough. In fact, you can probably get by with less. Some water is going to be found in the food that we eat. And a fairly safe rule to look at and to consider is the color of a person's urine. If the urine is clear or colorless, then they're getting enough water. If the urine is dark yellow, you really need to drink more water. If we don't get enough water, we can compare that to washing a whole sink full of dishes with a cup of water. You know, our kidneys need a certain amount of water to function properly, and when we drink that water, this helps to prevent us the problems. Inadequate water intake is one of the causes of urinary tract infections as well as the formation of kidney stones. It's very easy to spot a person who may have had a kidney stone because oftentimes wherever they go they're containing a bottle of water. And so you ask them, well, how come you're always carrying your water bottle? Well, doc, you know, my urologist told me that if I don't want to get another kidney stone, I've got to drink lots of water. So that's an easy way to recognize a person who might have had that problem.
When would you drink your water? I mean, a couple of glasses with a meal, how would you drink your water?
Well, I think it's better not to drink the majority of water with your meals. The best way is as soon as you get up in the morning, drink 1 or 2 glasses of water. It can be warm if you like, cold. It shouldn't be ice cold, but drink your water before your meals and between your meals, preferably not with your meals. And as you spread it throughout the day, it's very easy to get the water in. Just, you know, take a water break at 10 o'clock, not a coffee break. Take another water break about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, the mid-afternoon, And then again, you know, you can take some water later on in the evening, providing you don't drink too much, and you may have to end up getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. So you don't want to take your water late at night. Better early in the day and in between your meals is really the best time to get your water in.
Yeah, we recommend not drinking large amounts of fluids with your meal because digestion really takes place, or best place, in a very concentrated manner. And when you dilute your digestive juices with all that water, it's just much harder on your system. Doesn't matter what kind of water you drink.
Well, I know that sometimes people will say you've got to buy bottled water, you need to get distilled water, but I think the best water, in most places here in the United States, the water supply is safe, and so I say get the water that comes out of your tap. In fact, they say kind of pipe C-cola, you know, it comes out of the pipe. And that's usually very safe and very adequate. But a safe water supply is important. And fortunately, in most places in the United States, it is safe to use the water which is locally available. You don't need to buy bottled water. You don't need to have all kinds of filters and other things for the water. Sometimes for taste, you might want to use a filter, but in most cases, it's really not necessary.
What would you say to the people that say, well, I drink a couple of cups of coffee in the morning, I drink some tea in the afternoon, and maybe a couple of cups of coffee again at night? How much does that account for in terms of water intake?
Well, that's providing them with liquid, but they really need the water. In fact, interestingly enough, most caffeinated beverages act kind of as a diuretic, and they help to produce loss of your urine. So again, water is much better than using caffeinated beverages, the coffee or tea.
We're nearing the end of our program, but I would like you to discuss vitamins just for a minute. Which vitamins do we really need as vegetarians?
We need all the vitamins, but an important vitamin that we may need as a vegetarian is vitamin B12. And you need to make sure that we have that, and since it's not found in plant foods, it's best to take a vitamin B12 supplement.
Okay. Would you take that once a week, once a day, or?
Oh, once a day would be fine for the average person. All we need is 2 or 3 micrograms, which is really a very small amount. So that's easy to get it in. But usually the tablets come in 500 and 1,000 microgram tablets. We don't need that big a tablet.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ng. I know our time just flew and there's so much more to talk about. Isn't it time you take care of you? Spend more time thinking about what to eat, get enough exercise, plan enough rest, and even plan for little daily mini vacations to feel invigorated. While you're doing that, you'll want to be sure to hear what Dr. Milton Teske has to say about caffeine the next time we get together. You'll be surprised about the things you'll be learning, because like your Creator, we want you to enjoy good health. We'll see you soon on another Wonderfully Made.